Hey there. In today's video, we're going to be looking at creating this 3D point cloud destruction effect. You can see like that, and with the rotation as well. The exact final result will be a slightly simplified version where we won't need any of this object tracking and the line work, just to keep the tutorial concise. We'll also be using Torin Blankensmith, I believe that's his name. His MediaPipe integration plugin, which is inside this project file here. You can download this for free. He's gratefully shared it, and I will include the download link to it below. This will not be a tutorial on that though, so instead we will be extracting information from that, and I'll briefly touch on it, and then using that to then control the point cloud like such. Alright, let's dive into it. And one last thing before we get started, this project file as is, with all the complete functionality and everything, is available for download as always in the Patreon below, just a few bucks, and you can access this project file as well as every other project file that I do on this channel. It's a really great way to support me and helping me to create cooler stuff in the future for you guys, and I really appreciate everyone that does it. Yeah, but essentially what we're going to do is we're going to start off by creating this point cloud. We're then going to look to create the thresholds to sort of create this wave effect, and then integrate it with our hand tracking. So we've done quite a few tutorials using this feedback point cloud loop before, so if I am going maybe a bit too fast or like skipping over some steps, feel free to explore some of those more tutorials. And if you're a beginner to Touchdesigner, I will attempt to explain everything as best as I can, but it does really help if you're familiar with this software. So I highly recommend spending a little while just learning the basics and fundamentals before diving into something like this. Cool. So as always, I'm going to hide my background here. I'm also working off a laptop today, so forgive me for being a little bit slow with things. And I'm going to keep this project file up here as reference, just so I don't have to perfectly memorize everything for you guys today. And we're going to want to drag in our point cloud file. So I have this 3D scan, which is what you were just seeing before, which I've used. Touchdesigner has some some default point files. So if I get a point file in from there, you can see we have the default one, which is a sphere, and I think if we click past, there's also a banana that we can use, and you can sort of see the preview of it here, at least on Mac. So I'm going to select the banana one for today, and essentially I'm just going to separate out into two different rows, one for the point cloud itself, and then a bottom row for color. So I'm going to copy and paste those, and then drag this point file onto these point file selects, which is just these operators here, dragging it like so, and then essentially we want to initialize the top row with XYZ, and then the bottom row with red, green, blue. So when we click on here, we want to set red to 1 second, sorry, I had my project paused. So on default, XYZ has been loaded, and then here on below, red, then green, then blue. Some point clouds, if you've used your own ones or downloaded one from the internet, may not have all of these options or may have more options. I highly recommend just exploring that, or potentially texturing the color separately. We won't be going into that in this tutorial, but those are potentially some ways you could fix it. So on the top row, what we want to do is connect in a point transform and then essentially create a little feedback loop that we add back in and then render it out. So let's go ahead and do that. So the first thing we want to do is connect this to a point cloud transform. I'm going to leave everything as is, but if I go up to the top here and I just show you this operator, you can see all these parameters here. We have like translation, rotation, scale, and such like that. essentially you don't need to necessarily change any of these, but depending on how your own point clouds initialize, this is a very handy operator to have, so that way you can rotate it and transform it before we do any sort of feedback loop, rather than rotating it all after the feedback loop, if that makes sense. And then essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do I want to copy it down? Let's do the color route first, because that is significantly easier. So I'm going to copy these operators and then go down to color. So the first thing we want to connect out from this color by right-clicking the exit there is a math operator. And I'm just going to connect it into this math operator here. You then want to set the multiply to be 1/255, just so we get the right color ratio, like so. And then we want to go ahead and connect that with a over, so we can connect like that and do an over. Instead of connecting it to the first input, we're going to swap this one to the second input and then disconnect that first one, or just like that. And then coming out of the color, we also will need to create our threshold. So, sorry, my brain is completely just disjointed today, but I promised myself I would get a tutorial recorded for the people. Cool, so we can come back to this color now, as that is properly initialized. I'm also going to connect, coming out from this over, which we will fill in soon, a null. And if you want, you can name this color, just so you can remember. Sorry about that. I have a hungry cat, you know how it goes. So essentially what we're doing in this part before the feedback loop is that we're going to create a threshold. Now this threshold is going to be what we connect our hand into later. And this threshold is essentially going to tell us where the trail that goes through the point cloud is. Now obviously we want one threshold to go off and create the noise displacement like we saw, and then we want another threshold to simply show that wave of color coming through. You could do it so that the whole thing changes color, but I prefer the wave, so I'm just going to be doing that route today. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and create a constant chop. If I spelled that correctly, it would appear like so. And the reason we're going to replace this later with the hand tracking op, but for now what I want to then do is get a threshold top like so, and I have that one here, and then I'm going to click plus on this constant and drag that value onto the chop reference. I'm going to leave it as is for now, but you want to make sure that your comparator is set to not equal. The RGB threshold here is going to determine how it goes through your image. So if you remember, we set red to be XYZ, or sorry, red, green, blue, RGB to be XYZ. So if I do red, it's going to travel along the x-axis, and then we can do green for Y and Z for blue, if that makes sense. And then we want to connect in our point transformation to this threshold like so. And then coming out from this threshold, we want to then connect in a level. And in this case, we then want to go to the RGB tab and drag everything to 0 except for the high red and high alpha. Now, what we're doing here is we're coloring it to be the color red. If you saw in the middle, at the beginning of the video, that when I moved my hand through it, there was like a red wave that came across. This is where we're setting that color, so you can set it sort of to be whatever you like. I'm just going to keep it as red today. And there's also other ways you could pick the color. You could do like an inverted color, for example, if you went to your pre and then invert the color like so, and then set all these back to normal. But I'm just going to keep it as red. And then we can actually connect this level into the second bit of our operator, our over operator. And that is our color done. Now, everything won't look right until we connect up the threshold to properly move, so don't worry too much about that. but I'm just going to quickly tidy all this up. So I'm just going to select all this and then drag it down, and then make our two paths a bit more distinct, like so. And then we want to have these two coming down like that. Cool. Now, well, let's go ahead and copy this threshold that we created here, and we're going to have this one go up. And instead of the comparator being not equal, we're going to set it to be less. And then, do I have the soften still there? I do. Keep the soften as is. It just spreads out the threshold a little bit to make it a bit more of a gradual sort of wave that comes through. So the reason why we're setting it to be less here instead of not equal is because now we want everything that is less than our hand threshold, so as we move across the image, to be transformed and hold that transformation, so that like explosion. If we had it on not equal, then simply the parts of the image where the threshold is, so the red wave would be the part that's displaced. Potentially you like that, but this is the route I'm going today. From this threshold, we're going to go ahead and start our feedback loop. Now again, we've done this several times at this point in this tutorial, so I'm going to copy this down like so, and then go through and explain it, but might do it a little bit quickly. So let's first connect into a null. So this is just a very simple null operator that I've named start, so you can double click here and rename it if you want. This is going to be the start of our feedback loop. Then we want to connect in a feedback, obviously, like so. Then we want to connect the let's do the noise first. So then from the feedback, let's connect in a noise. Now I have played around with the noise a lot to sort of get a particular look that I like. You can pause the video right now and copy the settings on screen if you would like. You can see here we've programmed the harmonic gain to be a parameter later on, so don't worry about that too much. Here's the value it was set to beforehand. I highly recommend you just play around with the noise for yourself and create a look that you like, but we'll see that in later on. And then on the transform tab, I also had this piece of code typed in on the z-axis to have like a little bit of movement going on, and then everything else is the same. This is sort of where we're creating the explosion. So the look of the explosion will be what we're crafting here. Sorry for not clarifying that. Then from there, we want to connect in a math. This math will give us a little bit of further control over it later, but for now I believe everything is kept as the same. And honestly, I didn't even end up changing anything much in the final result. Then let's go ahead and get a select, though you could actually just do this with a null, but I'm just going to keep as is. Then going back to our first null here, so our start, drag that select on like so. This is because you might want to add in a separate different bit of noise, but we're going to keep it as simple as possible today. From there, let's connect in a over, like so, and that's what we have going on here. So we have our over, and then plug our math into the second operation like that. From there, we want to connect it to another null, and I've named this null FB end, which stands for feedback end, because we want to then drag this onto our feedback like so, and you'll see it initialize like that. Cool. So all is working. So again, to quickly explain what is going on, just not super in depth, we are grabbing, creating a noise like displacement here. So everything that is less than the threshold that we set with our hand, we're going to create a sort of noisy random version of that point cloud, then combine it with the original point cloud so that way it doesn't stray too far from the image, and then have a bit of a feedback loop going on so that way it holds its shape. I hope that makes sense in sort of like layman's terms. Cool. Now what we want to simply do is connect this one into our original point transform here, so we can connect an add from this feedback end. So an add like so, and I believe we want to actually swap around those two. Yep. So we have our add here. Let's plug the point transform from here into that first slot, and then the feedback end into the second, and then connect this to null for good measure. And then if you want, you can name this position, as it is our position. Cool. All right, let's move that constant out of the way. So now we want to instance this data in a geometry node. Now, if you haven't done instancing before, I'm not going to go super into depth, as we've done it many times in this tutorial before. But if you're listening to this and it does intrigue you, like these individual things like feedback loops or instancing geometry, let me know, and I might do separate tutorials on those. They might need to be like maybe a little course or something, just to help educate people rather than creating a project necessarily. I'm not sure if there's actually any demand for that, but if it is something you would like to learn, like those sort of individual small ideas and maybe bite-sized chunks like 5-minute videos, let me know. That would be a cool thing to explore. But so the way we're going to instance this is by doing there's a few different ways. Let's do an add points option. So get an add from the swap tab, turn on points, going to connect this to a convert, and then I'm going to convert from all types to go render as point stripes. And then am I keeping everything else the same? Sorry, need to convert to, here it is, particles per point. Awesome. So this is going to be all the individual dots that we use. From here we can right click. A lot of people miss this step, so pay attention. So right click this exit here on the convert, go to our comp tab and grab a geometry. Awesome. Then we want to get our default rendering component, so a camera. I have other elements going on here, so don't worry about those. A light if you want to use one, not entirely necessary for this tutorial. And then a material as well. So we have our materials tab, and I'm just going to use a point sprite and drag that onto our geometry. Awesome. Am I using any other rendering components? I am not. Sweet. So now we can go to our top and we can grab a render. I need to set this like so. You won't need to do this. This is purely because I have multiple geometry instances going on. We can then connect this to a RGB key if you'd like to add a black background, and then we can connect this to a null, and then click this blue button so that way it makes it our background. So you won't see anything at the moment because we haven't actually instanced the data. So the way we do that is we go back to our geometry and go to our instancing tab and turn on instancing. Awesome. Now we want to use this position as our translate op, so we can drag it on like that, and then set the translate X to be R, and then Y, G, and then B, like we did before. So R, and then G, and then B. Awesome. You can see that our banana is rendering here with a whole bunch of noise going on. Now it's off screen at the moment because we need to actually potentially move the camera. But before we do that, let's add the color in. So when we go to the second instancing tab here, we have our color options. So we can then go grab our color node and drop it like that, and then like before, set our R, set our G, and set our B, like so. And I'm getting an error. Ops must be the same length. Did I mess something up? Potentially I did. Potentially these two are not the right size, but there we go. I just had a bit of a feedback error going on. If you have that error for some reason, you might want to just toggle your feedback. And so if it's off screen at the moment, there's a few different ways we can fix that. One is we can go back to our point transform from the very start and then sort of, play with the scale. Maybe you want to translate it down like -10. Maybe that's too far. -2. Yeah. Alternatively, you can go on your camera. You can move your camera around. There's so many different ways you can even move the geometry itself. I'm going to use the point transform we had because there is a reason we brought it in, and just sort of roughly guess. Like, I don't need it to be perfect for this tutorial. Cool. Now I'm just going to disable that harmonic gain on the noise. And you can see we have our 3D banana point cloud, or whatever point cloud you have chosen to instance. And it sort of has the bit of movement going on here. If you don't have movement on the noise transform tab, that's what was creating the movement. So you can see here it goes to still when we disable that. So make sure you have this piece of code included. And now to see the wave in effect, we can pretty much move this transform, so this constant that we created, to drag the bar up and down, except the range is probably not perfect. So if I make that -1 or even -2, you can sort of see how that's moving across, but the image is probably too big. So there's a few different ways we can fix this. One, we can go into our threshold and we can drag the soften down a little bit, but I think the best way to do it is to actually make the scale of our point cloud a little bit bigger, like so. And then maybe on our camera we want to actually zoom out like that. So let's do that. I think 4.2 is probably a bit too big, so let's just do 2. Oh, maybe 2 point something like that. Yeah, and then let's see what happens when we move our constant around now. That's a little bit better. Maybe make this -3. There we go. So this is a good chance actually to set up our range. So from this constant, actually what we should have done earlier is we should connect this to a null. And then we want to set this null instead. So let's click the plus on this null and then drag that onto our thresholds and go chop reference. Let's make sure we do it for both of them. Like so. You see here with the soften, when I make that 1, it makes the bar very small. I'm going to change that back to 6, make sure everything is normal. Cool. Now between this constant, we want to enter a math. Now that's because when we move our hand around, it's going to be a normalized value, so between 0 and 1. And the problem is that point cloud, at least the range of it, is not normalized to that same value. So what we might want to do is go like into our constant here and type in a number like -4 and be like, oh yeah, that looks like a good start. Maybe you want it to start off the image at like -5. That's nice. So then on our math, if we go into our range tab, we go from 0 to 1 to instead -5, and then do the same for the positive. Maybe we want to type in 5 here and be like, oh yeah, the whole thing's destroyed. That is good, but maybe that's too far. Yep, so you can see 3, it's still destroyed. 1, it's almost fully destroyed, but not completely. 2 is fully destroyed, so I reckon between -5 and 2 works really well. And you see now that when I drag this slider along, it completely destroys the cloud. And even here, it's still hovering a little bit, so let's make this 3 instead. And now when I drag that slider through, we destroy our point cloud. Before we now do the MediaPipe integration, it's a good chance for you to say that you could set this value to be controlled by anything. You can make it be audio reactive, maybe have the banana spinning around exploding to the music, a whole bunch of different ideas you could do. But in this tutorial, obviously, we're going to explore the MediaPipe integration a little bit, not a lot though. So if you haven't already downloaded MediaPipe and installed it, again, there is the man who created the Touchdesigner integration himself has a really great tutorial on it. Highly recommend watching and understanding that if you want to use it at all in your projects, to make sure you pay proper credit to him as well. And then when you drag it into your own project file like you have here, I'm going to actually, rather than copy and paste, I'm just going to move this down. You can initialize it like so. So when I go into it, you can see here that I have it set up. The only ones I'm really interested in today is detect hands, so I've just turned everything else off. From the detect hands, the hand tracking here, you will want to connect out the options that we need. In this case, what am I using? I am using the second output. So we actually, in this tutorial, are using the, super fine line, but this first little node here, so I've just connected in a select, like so. Now this option has a million different parameters, as you can see. So the ones I've opted to use, because this tracks your entire hand, is the wrist position, because that's relatively center of the wrist, center of the hand in my opinion. Now I've done hand 1 wrist X, which is going to be between 0 and 1 as it goes across the screen, like I said earlier. You can also do your second hand, but we're only just going to use one hand from today's tutorial. And then connect this to an out, which is going to give us the option to access this information as in the parent. And then the same for this bottom connection here on the MediaPipe integration. Just connect this to an out if you want to use your video feed. Very quickly with the video feed, I just have it connected to a null, and then you can display it alongside like that, and then map the in video editing or in Touchdesigner you can sort of align the two, but totally unnecessary. Cool. So you can see now once we've connected that to an out and we zoom back out to our original project. Sorry if I'm going a bit fast again, just skipping over some basics in the Touchdesigner world. We want to connect in a select, like so. In this case, I've gone from, I'm just grabbing that H1 wrist. If you are doing just one operator, you can leave this as a star, but I'm specifying the H1 wrist here. And then we want to rename it from the star, so that represents all, to X, just so we have a simple understanding of what is happening. If you do not have your value as a number like so, you will need to connect it to an analyze, but in this case it is working. So what I'm going to do is, this is totally unnecessary, but I'm going to grab another select like this. And then let's go back up to our constant that we created like so. Now you can see that we already in our math normalize this between 0 and 1, and as I hold my hand up and move it very far left, it goes to 0, and then very far to the right, it goes to 1, which is perfect because now all I need to do is replace this constant with my hand chop. We have an issue. The issue is that we've renamed it from chan1 to x. So what we're going to do here is just go into our thresholds and change this from chan1 to x, like so, and make sure we do that with both. And now, when I hold up my hand and move it across the image, we destroy the point cloud and then bring it back to life. And that is essentially the tutorial. So I want to apologize for sort of rushing through this one. I thought this one would be sort of like a video where we've used a lot of these concepts in the video before, so I don't think it was like super necessary to teach this for people learning the software. More so it seemed like people were just interested in like what was happening here. And it's relatively simple. A lot of the magic is being done by MediaPipe, which is really great. But as always, there is obviously a few extra features and things that work in the project file I have here. So if you want to access this, it's available for free download on my Patreon, links below. In terms of what you might want to do from here, you could, like I have in the top one, connect in your second hand to control rotation potentially. You can set automatic rotation of the image as well. This is a good opportunity for if you hold up your hand and then go to the noise parameter to play with the noise options and sort of create a look that's unique to you and something you like. And yeah, just go crazy. Change the color. So if I wanted to try that invert thing that I was talking about earlier, if we replace this level and then drag invert like that, we can see here we're actually inverting the wrong parts, but you know, still works. But yeah, that is pretty much it for today's video. I hope you've enjoyed. Like and subscribe is greatly appreciated. Feedback appreciated. Suggestions for videos also appreciated. And yeah, I hope to be back in my regular setup very shortly, and we can dive into creating a lot more content soon. So before I get to that point, please, whatever it is you want to learn, let me know, and I will do dedicated tutorials as much as I can. All right.